Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Okay, you citizens of the world, welcome back to the second segment of Live from the Heartland for December 12th. And our next guest is no stranger to the show. It's the one and only Kathy Kelly. She's from Voices in the Wilderness. And a little bit I got off of Wikipedia. It says that Kathy is an American peace activist, pacifist, and author, one of the founding members of Voices in the Wilderness, and until the campaign closed in 2020, a coordinator of Voices for Creative Nonviolence. As part of a peace team, worked in several countries. She's traveled to Iraq 26 times. And I'll go on and just say she's also been to Gaza a number of times, is not allowed to go back because she tried to bring in supplies. And with all that said, good day to you, Kathy Kelly.
Well, hello, Mike, and thank you very much for having me, and thank you, Hal, for producing. And it sure is an important time to, I think along with so many other people across the country, wake up every morning thinking what can be done with regard to Gaza, because we're in the country that's provisioning Israel with the weapons and the capacity to starve people, forcibly displace them, maim them, kill their journalists and their healthcare workers, poison their water, attack people in the West Bank. It's genocide. And Mike, when you and I were young, probably one of the biggest horrors we ever grappled with was the Holocaust. How ever in the world could people in Germany have lived alongside the Nazis or tolerated any of the death camps? And I remember thinking, well, I would never have been a bystander. But here we are watching a genocide on our screens. And so it's something our country is so very, very complicit in. And I guess one of the most important things is not to let it slip out of the news, not to go back to page 8 of the New York Times. It should be page 1 every day of every newspaper.
Do you think the media is giving this any of the attention it deserves, or?
Well, it's difficult, I'll admit, because Israel won't let the media come in. They have once, in fact, just today, the Israeli Supreme Court, more or less, said, okay, we'll give you another extension before you're going to have to let international journalists in. So, but that's still no excuse, because the Palestinian journalists, 260 of whom have been murdered, have still been willing to say, we will not be silent. And they're still reporting. So the reports can go forth. You know, that Drop Site News with Jeremy Scahill, very brave outfit. They're putting reports up all the time, and Al Jazeera and various, not so much in the mainstream, but reliable sources are telling the stories of what's happening inside of Gaza. And
people, let me just jump in and say that people could really get a lot of information on a number of topics if they go to Al Jazeera. It's free. It's online. You can get it if you have internet TV too. And it is a wonderful source of news.
I agree. And, one of the things that's happening right now is that, well, it's the old divide and conquer. And Israel is just so skilled at dividing, division after division, wall after wall. And so now Gaza has been divided into basically East Gaza and West Gaza. So the East is right along the coastline. It's the Mediterranean. Of course, the fisher people aren't allowed to sail out into the sea, and people certainly aren't going to beaches. Over 2 million people are crammed into an area that's uninhabitable. It's so poisoned already, and they're living amid rubble, and diseases are rampant.
And floods. There's like all these rains going on right now.
And winter is coming. more storms are due. So people are living in tents or makeshift sorts of places with a plastic tarp over poles. And if they are getting food, quite often the food that gets in is like junk food or cigarettes, but not the nutrients that they need. And the nutrients they need are in trucks backed up. The UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Association, and other UN groups say we could feed people. Just let us in. But the division is such that in West Gaza, that's where the Israeli Defense Forces have their sort of newly built barracks and offices and equipment. And the only supply trucks being allowed in are going to West Gaza. And also living in West Gaza are about 300 mercenary soldiers. These are Palestinians who said, okay, we'll work for the Israelis. And formerly, they were part of gangs that were looting some of the trucks that were trying to go in and bring supplies. And so Israel is apparently going to try to partner with the United States and build a kind of a Potemkin village, like a facade that says, oh, look how well things are going. Here's this new building. Here's a tree. Here's a garden. But meanwhile, the people that are trapped in East Gaza are probably going to become so desperate that what the Israelis hope is that they'll say, please get us out of here. Send us somewhere. We can't live. We can't subject our children to this. And at the same time, now, Israel is further dividing what we call the West Bank. Gaza is separated from the West Bank, and the West Bank has been carved into little Bantu stones. Remember, Mike, when you were campaigning with regard to South Africa, and we said, no, we don't want to accept Bantu stones, little small villages that are separated. We want a place that's contiguous, that's, represents the people who live there. Well, the West Bank is being divided and carved and made unlivable. And some of the people that are quite organized are also quite young. In fact, you have to really ask if some might not be child soldiers. They're like 15, 16-year-olds. And they're called the Hilltop Youth. And the Hilltop Youth are so named because Ariel Sharon, a prime minister of Israel back in 1954, said, we will seize the hilltops. We'll get the upper strategic heights, and from there, we'll turn Palestine into Swiss cheese. And that's what's happening. Bedouin encampments, small villages, smaller cities are being pounced upon, descended upon by people who come from the higher areas, and they literally drive their flocks right into the homes of Palestinians who are terrified. And then they steal the Palestinian flocks, and they torch cars, and they block off roads. And many of these settlers are wearing police uniforms or military uniforms. Although, if you're a settler, you're actually exempt from joining the Israeli military because they say, look, we're the ones who are defending this country. So it should not be the case that AIPAC can bully United States elected officials into continued support for a genocidal, human rights violating government. But that's the case. AIPAC has still got a vice-like grip on very, very many of the congresspeople and senators in the United States. And certainly as elections are coming up, for instance, Raja Krishnamurti would like to take Senator Dick Durbin's place. Well, I think Raja Krishnamurti's got to quit taking AIPAC money if he wants to take that place. And I would say the same of people who are in competition with Raja Krishnamurti. Everybody ought to look at that campaign very carefully and ask how much AIPAC money have the candidates taken and how subservient have the candidates been to AIPAC. to Israel.
Yeah, we had Don Rose on earlier, and we did talk a little bit about the Senate race and about Raja Krishnamurti taking money also from MAGA people. We'll see. I mean, it's bad enough taking money from AIPAC, and I don't know if Stratton is also taking money from AIPAC.
Stratton has been a very subservient person in terms of service to Israel's demands.
Those are the two front candidates. Are there any candidates that you know of for the U.S.
Robin
Senate?
Kelly might be a little bit better. She had not taken any money from AIPAC until very recently. Now, that's a very bad time to be taking money from AIPAC very recently. But up until February of 2025, she hadn't taken AIPAC money.
Tell our listeners a little bit on AIPAC, like a sentence or two, what they are.
So, in response to the Holocaust and all of the horror that caused, people in Israel and outside of Israel said, we've got to protect ourselves. We've got to build up such a bulwark of protection that this will never happen again. And what they did was build the American-Israeli political action committees. And, no one wants to say, well, we'd like to see another Holocaust. But what these committees have done is forced U.S. politicians to either accept whatever policies the Israeli government, the Knesset, wants to make. And if they don't accept, the AIPAC now has so much power, they can say, okay, then we're going to back your opponent and you can kiss your political career goodbye. And AIPAC has also gone to the universities and pretty much said the same to chancellors and hedge funds and powerful people within universities. They've compromised many of the pillars of society within the United States. There's kind of a face-off with a lot of the labor union movement. Like, for instance, you have that amazing young labor activist, Chris Smalls, out in New Jersey, saying, look, I'm going to organize Amazon laborers and we're going to oppose AIPAC and I'm going to get on that flotilla and try to sail right on into Gaza. So he's somebody to contend with. And there are others. There are some celebrities now that are saying, you know what, maybe the answer is to free Marwan Barghouti. Some regard him as the Nelson Mandela of Palestine. In fact, they launched a campaign to free him from Nelson Mandela's cell in Robben Island because they wanted to make that point that he's somebody who could unify Palestinians. And Palestinians need unifying leadership because, and I think with the help of Israel, they've become very, very divided. Fatah is divided from Hamas, and Fatah and Hamas are sometimes divided from the Palestinian NGO groupings. But non-governmental organizations. But it does seem like maybe Marwan Barghouti, he's serving a sentence of 5 lifetime prison sentences. But he may be somebody who could unify the different groups. And even some of the most ardent Zionists have said, yeah, let that guy out. We need him as a voice to try to move forward and get beyond the impasse that we're in, because you certainly couldn't say that Israel has eliminated Hamas. There are 20,000 Hamas fighters that are still there.
Yeah, it seems like it's still continuing that, I was going to ask you about, okay, all of a sudden there was peace in Gaza, supposedly, and clearly there isn't, and what's going on. And I just want to make a note here before I forget. You mentioned Nelson Mandela, and this fellow who, pronounce his name one more time, who is maybe the Mandela of Palestine?
Yeah, Marwan Barghouti.
Marwan Barghouti.
M-A-R-W-A-N, yeah.
Well, I have been to that prison cell where they initiated the campaign on Robben Island. I was there in 2014 or 15, took a 13-mile boat ride out there, and I have a photograph of his prison cell, a number of them. It was pretty moving. Let's go back to the flotilla that you mentioned. You were involved in a few of these flotillas, and most recently we saw some really put together efforts to try to get to the shores, and I'm not sure if any of the boats made it or not. What can you tell us, Kathy?
Well, I regard it as the miracle on the Mediterranean. None of those boats made it to the Gazan shore, although some of the fishermen were able to go out and catch fish because the Israelis were so preoccupied trying to stop the flotilla. But what they did accomplish was amazing. 40 different countries were part of that effort, and people spoke different languages. They had different political views. They had all kinds of different logistical expectations. They managed to coordinate a brilliant forward-moving flotilla and full of humanitarian supplies. They had nonviolence trainings overnight on the boats. They managed to have consensus decision-making. I've never seen anything like it. And when it first started, people were saying they're never going to get enough money to pull this off. Well, they got the funding as well. And they just had, in Ireland, a lengthy meeting to try to figure out, okay, what next? But the other thing that's exciting is that along with Chris Smalls, the labor leader from New Jersey, Greta Thunberg was on those boats. And when people say, who will lead the militant young people in working for peace? You couldn't ask for a better leader than Greta Thunberg. She's got everything it takes. And then there were also people like Phil Tottenham of Veterans for Peace. And I was with him when he declared, okay, I'm going to do a 40-day fast in New York City. And by golly, he did all 40 days. Yours truly had to end at 36 days. But yeah, he's the real deal. And so there are many young groups, at least they're half my age, who are coming together on the issue of ending a genocide and getting the relief into people who are starving still and desperate for relief.
Kathy Kelly, talk a little bit about international support or lack thereof for Israel. You mentioned Ireland and a meeting that took place there. I say most of the world is opposed to what Israel is doing with the backing of the U.S. But clearly there are places that are still supportive of Israel, as well as places that are starting to lean on Israel to give it up, so to speak.
Well, certainly in Ireland, there are groups every week out campaigning. And Catherine Connolly, who is now the president of Ireland, is quite left-leaning and very strong on saying the genocide must end. Mary Robinson, a former president of Ireland, is the chairperson of the elders, and she's got a strong voice. But gosh darn it, Shannon Airport is being used every day to send more weapons and more soldiers over to Israel or to support Israel's wars against Lebanon, against Syria, against Yemen. And so Ireland has a lot of work yet to do. And I think, you're so right. People have turned out in the millions in capitals around the world, but at the United Nations, not a single country stood up for Gaza. Not Russia, not China, not any of the Arab countries. They all sat on their haunches and watched while the Trump so-called peace plan went through. And, in a way, I think, how sometimes you say, I want to hear some peace and quiet in this room, tell those kids to cut down the racket. Well, that's what Trump wanted. He didn't want peace. He wanted quiet. He wanted it to look like he had really made some gains and strides, but you can't see it. It's dismal and doomed as far as we can see. And they want quiet because they don't want people to pay attention any longer. So, I think Chicago was pretty exemplary with the ICE scandals and raids and invasion. They paid attention big time and made headway. Or even now, the church that has the sign, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph aren't here. ICE came and they're in hiding. We have to keep pushing for that kind of attentiveness. Don't look away. It's a very bad time to look away from Gaza or the West Bank. Very important time to keep listening to the Gazan spokespeople, to the people with CARE in the Chicago area. That's the Islamic organization. And then also Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid and Muslim TV News. Those are people that are still speaking very vociferously and clearly.
What would be your current assessment of the so-called peace plan, and what do you really think Israel and the U.S. want to do in the future for Gaza?
Well, I think they want real estate in the future. I think they've got their, they believe in eyes on the prize, and to them, the prize is that coastline and the natural gas and being able to control the farmland, the very beautiful farmland that could be growing olive trees and fruits. And I think the peace plan is unlikely to succeed because their demands are sort of fantasy demands. You can't tell everybody in Hamas, okay, give up your weapons and we're going to continue to bomb you and imprison you and torture you. But you also have to give up your weapons so that you have no means to defend. Now, I'm going to stick with pacifism. I think people are better off defending themselves through nonviolent means. But the Trump plan had no plan whatsoever. And by saying to the United Nations Relief and Works Organization, you have to disband, you can't have any role. Well, those are the people who know how to distribute the goods. And so there was much that was anybody within the actual delivery of relief circles could immediately say, this isn't going to work. This is a non-starter. And I think Francesca Albanese is the person I would listen to, or Craig Machiver, a former human rights UN official, a pretty high-level official. And they have both said it's an unworkable criminal plan that's meant to continue a genocide, a slower genocide, but a genocide.
Kathy Kelly, this past week you gave a talk in D.C., I believe, hosted by the JFK Peace Speech Committee. Give us a little quickie on what you talked about.
Well, JFK's speech ought to be revisited again and again, and this committee does that once a month. And what I wanted to emphasize was that JFK said all of the countries have to be represented. He really, in fact, that same month that he gave that speech, he went over to Ireland and addressed the Irish Parliament. And he said to them, the most important thing you can do is work for peace. And I think that he was, in a sense, sowing the seeds for his own assassination because he came out so vigorously in favor of an end to demonization of the Soviet Union. He said, they're not perfect, we're not perfect, but stop demonizing. And so, now we have to stop demonizing China, stop demonizing Russia, stop, pulling the relics of the Cold War out of the dustbin of history and perpetrating a new Cold War. It doesn't make any sense. We're facing ecological collapse. How will we deal with it if we don't learn how to collaborate?
Give us a couple of words of encouragement as we go out that you might suggest people listen to and perhaps follow.
Follow the young people. They got slammed. They got slammed by their own universities on campuses across this country, but they haven't disappeared. So I'd say keep your eye on Greta Thunberg, and in Chicago, keep your eye on the students who I believe will continue their idealism. But we don't know exactly what form it will take. And also the organizers at Broadview who took risks and told the ICE folks, bye-bye. Those are people to follow and embrace and welcome. And then we'll feel, I think, as though Christmas has some meaning to it.
Kathy Kelly, thanks so much. You're the best. It's always great having you come on. Everybody else.